It was just past midnight on a Thursday in late February. I had been sitting at my desk at the firm for 14 hours, staring at spreadsheets until the numbers blurred into something that looked almost like shapes, almost like art, if I tilted my head and let my eyes go soft. The drive home through downtown Toronto was all gray slush and red brake lights, the kind of night that makes you feel like the city is slowly pressing in on you from every side. When I got home, my mother was sitting in the kitchen. She wasn't reading, she wasn't making tea, she was just sitting at the marble island in her silk robe, her hands folded in front of her, and she was looking at the receipt. I stopped in the doorway. I felt the cold air from outside still clinging to my coat. The receipt was from a ceramics studio on Gerrard Street East. I had been renting a kiln bay there every Tuesday and Thursday evening for the past 8 months. $22 an hour. I paid in cash most times. That night I must have forgotten and used my debit card. My mother checked the joint account I still shared with my parents from university, the one I had never thought to close. She held the paper up without saying a word. Just held it up, the way you hold up evidence. Have you ever had someone look at the thing you love most in the world like it was proof of a crime? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. I opened my mouth to explain. She spoke first. Your father and I have given you everything, she said. Her voice was very quiet and very even. That is so much more frightening than yelling. We put you through Queens. We got you the articling position at Hartwell and Pierce. Do you know how many calls your father made? Do you have any idea what people will think when they find out our daughter has been sneaking off to play with clay? The word sneaking. As if I had been doing something shameful in the dark. I was about to say I was sorry, because that is what I always did. 26 years of saying sorry for taking up the wrong kind of space in that house. But something happened instead. Something shifted in my chest, quiet and irreversible, like a bolt clicking open in a lock that had been jammed for years. I said nothing. I went to my room. I packed one bag, the same duffel bag I had carried to residence at 18, now smelling of lanolin and clay dust. I called a cab, and I walked out of that house in Rosedale for the last time with $12,000 in my savings account and no plan whatsoever. My father's name was Gerald Whitmore, senior partner at Hartwell and Pierce, one of the oldest Bay Street firms in the city. Corporate law, mergers and acquisitions, the kind of work that happens in glass towers and never has a face. He had the handshake, the cufflinks, the corner office with the view of the lake, and the absolute unshakable belief that prestige was not something you earned, it was something you protected, like a heritage designation, like a trust fund. You did not walk away from it, you maintained it. My mother was Linda. Her whole life was a performance for an audience that existed mostly in her own imagination. She sat on the boards of 3 charities. She chaired the hospital gala every spring. She wore the right things to the right events, and she smiled in a way that never quite reached her eyes. And she said, constantly, endlessly, what will people think, as though people thought about us at all. My brother was Andrew, 31 years old, already a junior associate at the firm, already being groomed for partnership. He and my father spoke the same language, Latin maxims over Sunday dinner, case references dropped casually into conversation. Andrew was not unkind to me exactly. He was just oriented toward the future my parents had built for him, and I was not part of that landscape, so he never quite looked in my direction. And then there was me, Emma Whitmore, the anomaly, the one who, at 9 years old, had spent an entire summer making sculptures out of air-drying clay bought at Dollarama and filling every windowsill in the house with small, strange birds. My father had thrown them all in the recycling bin one afternoon without saying a word about it. Growing up, our Sunday dinners were not dinners. They were depositions. My father would sit at the head of the table and work through the week's events, like a lawyer preparing for trial. Andrew would outline his academic achievements, his extracurriculars, his mock trial victories. My father would nod, satisfied. Then his eyes would move to me. Emma, he would say, how is your ranking in the program? I am a semester away from finishing a degree I never wanted, and I am ranked 14th out of 60, and that is not good enough, and we both know it, and I am so tired. My mother would refill the water glasses and say nothing useful. The day I passed my CPA exams was supposed to be the proudest day of my professional life. My father shook my hand at dinner. Actually shook my hand, like I was a colleague, like I was finally worth acknowledging. And I remember thinking, standing there in my dress in that cold dining room, that I felt absolutely nothing, less than nothing, a kind of hollow absence where the feeling should have been. I had been a chartered accountant for 11 months when I left. So there I was, 26 years old, one duffel bag, $12,000. Toronto in February, which is to say, the coldest, grayest, most inhospitable version of a city that is already quite good at making you feel small. I called my friend Priya, who had been trying to get me to move to Vancouver for 2 years. She said, "Come." I went. I bought a one-way ticket on a WestJet sale for $240. I left the next morning without telling anyone. Vancouver in late winter is a revelation if you are coming from Toronto. The mountains are right there, white and enormous, and completely indifferent to everything happening below them. The air smells like rain and cedar. I stood outside the airport with my bag and cried, not from sadness, just from the sudden absence of pressure, like a diver surfacing. Priya had a couch for 2 weeks. After that, I found a basement suite in East Van. $650 a month, single window at ground level, the kind of apartment where you learn the schedule of everyone's feet. I got a job at a coffee shop on Commercial Drive. I made 8 hours of oat milk lattes a day. The tips were okay. The regulars were kind. I started to feel, very cautiously, like a person again. The nights were mine. That was the deal I made with myself. The days were for surviving, and the nights were for the work. I found a community ceramic studio on East Hastings, $45 a month membership, access to 2 kilns and all the reclaimed clay I could use. I went every evening after my shift. I came home smelling like iron oxide and wood smoke, and I slept better than I had in years. I had always worked small before, cautious, apologetic little pieces that fit on a windowsill. Now, with nothing left to lose and nowhere to be in the morning, I started going large. I built vessel forms the size of my torso. I carved into them, pressed into them, left the marks of my hands deliberately, visibly, the opposite of everything I had been trained to do. No smoothing things over. No presenting a clean, finished surface for other people's comfort. I did not think of it as art. I thought of it as breathing. 4 months in, I photographed a series of 8 large vessels and posted them to an online ceramics community I had been quietly following. I expected nothing. I had 17 followers, and one of them was Priya. Within 48 hours, I had 400 comments. One of them stopped me cold. "There is grief in this clay that I have not seen since Lucy Rhee. Who are you and where have you been?" Her name was Margot Tremblay. She was 53 years old, a gallery owner from Montreal who had been representing emerging ceramicists for 25 years. She had found my post through a mutual connection in the studio ceramics world. She sent me a direct message asking if we could speak. We talked for 3 hours the first time. She had this way of listening, very still, very present, that I had genuinely never experienced from an adult before. She did not interrupt. She did not redirect the conversation toward herself. She just listened, and then she said something that I have thought about almost every day since. She said, "Your work is not decorative, it is documentary. It is a record of a person learning to take up space. That is extremely rare and people will pay attention." Margot submitted my portfolio to the Canada Council for the Arts Emerging Artist Program. I did not ask her to. She just did it. 6 weeks later, I received a letter in my inbox with the Government of Canada logo, and I sat on my kitchen floor and read it 4 times. $48,000, a 1-year creation grant, the largest emerging artist grant the program offered. I called Margot. She answered on the first ring and said, "I know. Now let's talk about what you are going to make." What I made, over the following 14 months, was the largest body of work I had ever produced. Margot gave me access to a proper studio space in Montreal for 2 months. Then I came back to Vancouver and rented a warehouse unit in Strathcona and worked until I could not see straight. 53 pieces in total. Large, unsettling, beautiful things that looked like they had been pulled directly out of the ground. Margot showed the collection privately first, inviting collectors, curators, museum directors, interior designers with serious budgets. The response was immediate and overwhelming. She showed it publicly in Montreal and then in Toronto, and the Toronto opening was covered by Canadian Art Magazine, and a piece ran in the Globe and Mail that called the collection, and I am paraphrasing here because I have never been comfortable quoting my own press, one of the most significant debuts in Canadian ceramics in a decade. I read the review on my phone in the Strathcona warehouse with clay on my hands and a cold Tim's coffee on the workbench beside me, and I felt the same hollow terror I had felt standing in my parents' dining room the night I passed my CPA exams, except this time the terror was different. This time it was not emptiness, it was vertigo. The feeling of being very high up somewhere, and not yet trusting that the ground beneath your feet will hold. Then came the call from a company called Canopy Interiors. They were a Vancouver-based design firm with contracts across Western Canada and the Pacific Northwest. They wanted to acquire the entire Strathcona collection for their portfolio of installed public and private art. They also wanted to license my surface design work for a line of architectural ceramics they were developing. tiles and panels for commercial and residential projects. The negotiation took 4 months. Margot was extraordinary. She brought in a lawyer from Montreal who specialized in artist licensing agreements, and she sat across from their people and she did not blink. The final number was $18 million. Canadian. I want to be precise about this because I know how it sounds and I know people have questions. Before anything else, my lawyer and my accountant, yes, I finally found a use for all that accounting training, walked me through the tax picture. The collection sale was treated largely as capital gains. After the lifetime capital gains exemption for qualifying property and the applicable federal and provincial rates, I paid approximately $4.2 million in taxes. I want to say that clearly because it is the right thing to do and because I remember being a CPA student sitting in a seminar about exactly this scenario and thinking it would never be relevant to my life. After taxes and legal fees, I had just under $13 million. I did not buy champagne. I did not call anyone. I sat in the warehouse studio alone for a long time, looking at the marks on the concrete floor where the pieces had stood for 14 months. The shapes of them still visible in the dust, like the work had left a memory in the floor. Then I bought a plane ticket to the Okanagan. I had been there once, years ago, on a road trip with Priya. We had stopped at a winery outside of Naramata and sat on a patio above the lake, with a glass of something cold and local, and I had thought, quietly, that this was the most beautiful place I had ever seen. Rolling hills the color of old terracotta, ponderosa pine, the lake below, that impossible blue-green, the light in the afternoon coming in low and warm and sideways. I found the property through a realtor in Penticton. It was a 12-acre parcel above Naramata Bench, an older timber frame home that had been a working vineyard operation, with a detached structure at the rear that had served as a barrel storage building. High ceilings, concrete floors, north-facing skylights that ran the entire length of the roof. The moment I walked into that building, I stopped moving. I just stood there. Margot was on the phone in my pocket, and I could hear her saying, "Hello, hello, are you there?" And I could not speak for a full 30 seconds. I paid $6.8 million for the property. Cash. I kept the rest. Split between an RRSP, a TFSA, investments managed by an advisor Margot recommended, and a fund I was already planning, which I will come back to. The first month I lived there, I did nothing. I walked the property in the mornings. I drove down to the water in the afternoons. I cooked meals that took a long time to make. I slept 9 hours a night. I had not slept 9 hours a night since I was a child. I felt, for the first time since I could remember, like a person who was allowed to exist without justifying herself. Then an article came out. Canadian Art Magazine ran a long profile, a follow-up to their Toronto review, this time about the acquisition and what it signaled for the market value of Canadian studio ceramics. The journalist had found the property through the Penticton Land Registry. The article ran with a photograph of the studio building taken from outside, the mountains in the background, the lake just visible in the distance. The headline used the phrase, "new landscape," both literally and I think figuratively. My parents do not read Canadian Art Magazine. Andrew does not read Canadian Art Magazine, but apparently someone they know does. My brother called on a Tuesday morning while I was mixing a new clay body in the studio. I did not recognize the number, a 416 area code I did not have saved. I answered because I had been expecting a call from a supplier in Toronto. "Hey, Em, it's Andrew." I set down the clay. I walked to the window. Outside, the hills were just starting to show the first green of late spring, that pale, uncertain green that looks like the land is not sure yet if it trusts the weather. "Andrew," I said. "Yeah." His voice was different than I remembered, smaller somehow. The confident junior associate cadence was gone. "Hey, so, Mom and Dad saw the article. The Canadian art piece." He paused. "We all did, actually. That's some house you've got out there." I waited. "Look," he said, and I could hear him working up to something, clearing the runway for the ask. I could hear it the same way I used to hear the hesitation before my father delivered bad news in depositions. Things have been a bit rough, honestly. The firm restructured last fall. My position is different now than it was, and I've got the condo and the car lease and, He cleared his throat. Mom and Dad were thinking maybe we could come visit. All of us. Just to reconnect. It's been a while. Reconnect. I knew exactly what that word caused him to say. Andrew had never used words like that in his life. He did not do the language of feelings. He did the language of outcomes, which meant someone had coached him, which meant this call had been planned. They had not called when I left with a duffel bag at midnight in February. They had not called when I was splitting a basement suite and living on coffee shop wages. They had not called when the Canada Council letter arrived, or when the Montreal show opened, or when the Globe and Mail piece ran. For 2.5 years, I had been completely invisible to them. But now there was an article. Now there was a $6.8 million property on public record. Now they wanted to reconnect. Sure, I said. Come this weekend. I hung up before he could say thank you. They flew into Kelowna on a Friday afternoon. I drove to the airport to meet them in my truck, which still had clay on the seats from the previous week. My father was wearing a blazer in 30-degree heat. My mother had dressed for a Toronto charity luncheon. Andrew was in loafers. They stood outside arrivals in the bright Okanagan sunshine, looking like a delegation from a city that had never seen a vineyard. I drove them to the property without saying much. My father watched the landscape from the passenger seat the way he reviewed documents, evaluating, cataloging, calculating. My mother asked about the wineries we passed. Andrew looked at his phone. When we turned up the drive and the property came into view, my mother made a small sound I could not quite interpret. My father said nothing. We parked and I walked them through the house. The main residence first. The wide-open rooms with the timber beams and the view of the lake below. The kitchen with its old farmhouse table. The shelves lined with pieces I had kept back from the collection. Then I took them to the studio. I opened the doors and we stood in the long shaft of afternoon light coming through the north skylights. The empty shelves waiting for the next body of work. The work tables and the wheels and the kilns. The smell of iron oxide and raw earth that I loved more than anything in the world. My father walked slowly around the perimeter of the room. He looked at everything with that particular expression he used when he was pricing something. Not admiring, appraising. This is where you work, he said. It was not quite a question. This is where I work. He nodded once, slowly. He was doing math. I could see it. Running the square footage against the acquisition price. Trying to understand how the numbers had arrived at this. We had dinner on the deck. I had cooked everything myself. Late-season asparagus from the farm stand down the road, a roasted chicken, bread from the bakery in Naramata. My mother said the view was lovely. Andrew complimented the wine, a local Pinot Gris, and then immediately took out his phone and photographed the label. My father waited until the plates were cleared. He set his fork down precisely, parallel to the plate edge, the way he had always done it. The same gesture from 10,000 dinners in Rosedale. He folded his hands. Emma, he said, there are some things we should discuss. Here it is, I thought. I have been looking at Andrew's situation, he continued, and your mother and I have had some conversations. He is in a difficult position. The restructuring at the firm was, he paused, broader than anticipated, and his income has dropped considerably. He has obligations. The condo in Liberty Village. There are loan payments. Andrew was not looking at me. He was looking at the lake. My mother leaned forward slightly. She had the look she always got when she was about to say something she had rehearsed. Emma, she said, you have done so well. Honestly, we are so proud. She gestured at the property, the hills, the water, and family looks out for each other. That is what we do. We were thinking that perhaps you could help your brother. An investment or a loan, whatever is comfortable, just to help him stabilize things. To keep the family in good standing. To keep the family in good standing. There it was. 26 years in 4 words. Not help your brother because we love him and we are worried. Help your brother so that the picture we present to the world remains intact. So the Whitmore family, which is to say my father's reputation, which is to say the only thing that has ever actually mattered in this house, continues to look the way it is supposed to look. I looked at Andrew. For the first time all weekend, he looked back at me. His face was pale and unhappy, and he looked younger than 31. He looked like a boy who had spent his entire life running toward a target that kept moving, and I felt something I had not expected to feel. Not rage, not the old rehearsed hurt. Something much cleaner, something almost like grief, but for him, not for myself, because he was still in it. He was still sitting at the depositions table, still ranking himself against the expectations, still parsing every action for its effect on the family brand. He had never left, and I wondered if he even knew that leaving was an option. I let the silence sit for a moment. Below the deck, a Cooper's hawk was riding a thermal above the vineyard rows, patient and unhurried. I said, you did not come here to reconnect. My father's jaw tightened. I said, you came here with a bill. And I want to be honest with all 3 of you, because I think honesty is something this family has a significant deficit of. What you are describing, an investment to help Andrew, is not a family arrangement. It is a business proposition. And it is one being made by people who did not check if I was alive for 2.5 years. My mother started to speak. I held up my hand. I am not angry, I said. I want you to understand that. I have done a lot of work in the past 3 years to get to a place where I am genuinely not angry about how I was raised. but I am not going to pretend that what is happening right now is something other than what it is. I stood up. I moved to the edge of the deck, looking out at the lake. The light was going golden now, that long, late afternoon light that turns everything in the Okanagan into something from a painting. When I left Toronto, I said, I had $12,000 and a bag of clothes. I could not afford to call myself an artist out loud for the first year because I was afraid of what I would feel if I said it, and it turned out not to be true. I slept on a friend's couch. I made coffee for other people 8 hours a day. And every night, I went to a studio on East Hastings, and I made work that was genuinely the first honest thing I had ever made in my life. Not a performance for an invisible audience. Not a legacy asset generating returns. Just work that was true to what I actually was. I turned back to face them. Nobody helped me do that, I said. Not because there was no one who could have, but because no one called. No one checked. No one sent a letter or a text or even a single email to find out if I was okay. And that is the thing I need you to understand. Not to punish you with it, but because it is important information about what this family actually is, what it has always been. Andrew's hands were flat on the table. My mother was looking at her wine glass. My father was very still. I have been thinking, I continued, about what I want to do with what I have. Not just the money, the work, the position I am in. Margot, she is my gallerist. She always talks about the difference between extractive practice and generative practice, taking from the world versus putting something back into it. Our family, the one I grew up in, was extractive. It extracted performance from its children in exchange for conditional love. I do not want to run my life that way. I paused. I have set aside $750,000, I said, to fund a ceramics and visual arts residency program in partnership with several First Nations communities in BC. Young people who have been told their whole lives that making things is not real work, who have been pushed toward professional programs and career paths that look good on a family record. I am building studio spaces in 3 communities. I am bringing in working artists as mentors. And I am funding it entirely myself because I believe it is the right thing to do with money that came from making honest work. I looked at Andrew directly. That is my investment, I said, in something that matters. I am sorry you are having a hard year. I genuinely mean that. But I am not the solution to a problem that was built long before I had any money. Andrew, the firm's expectations, the condo, the optics of the Whitmore name, that is not a problem I created, and it is not a problem I can fix. I breathed in. The guest rooms are ready, I said. Stay tonight if you want. But in the morning, I think you should head back to Kelowna, and I think you should think about what I said. Not as a rejection, but as possibly the most honest thing anyone in this family has ever said at a dinner table. My father stood up. He was very controlled. He nodded once, the same single nod he had given me in the doorway of the studio. There was something in his face I had not seen before. Not anger. I had seen plenty of that. Not disappointment. I had seen that too. It was something more like the expression of a man who has just received a diagnosis he already suspected and has not yet decided what to do about it. My mother folded her napkin. Andrew pushed his chair back quietly. They went to their rooms. In the morning, without ceremony, they drove to the airport. I watched the truck disappear down the road from the studio window, and then I turned back to the work table, and I began. That was 8 months ago. The studio now has never been quieter or more full at the same time, which sounds contradictory until you have experienced it. Margot comes for 2 weeks every fall, and we work side by side and barely speak because we do not need to. My neighbor Elena, a retired school teacher who has lived on the bench for 30 years and knows every weather pattern and every soil condition, taught me how to identify local clay deposits in the surrounding hills, and now I am prospecting my own material, pulling clay directly from the land I live on, and putting it back into the world in a different form. That feels significant to me in a way I am still working out the language for. The residency program launched in September. The first cohort is 12 young people between 16 and 24, from 3 communities in the interior. They come to the studio 2 weekends a month. I have never in my life seen people work with the kind of hunger they bring. One of them, a 17-year-old from Penticton, made a piece in his 3rd session that stopped every adult in the room. He had no idea it was extraordinary. He thought he was just trying something. I told him that is the best possible way to make something extraordinary. I have not heard from my father since that morning. My mother sent an email 3 months ago. It was brief and formal, the tone of someone dictating correspondence to an assistant. She said she hoped I was well, and that she thought the work I was doing in the communities was admirable. She did not mention the weekend. She did not mention what was asked of me or what I said in response. It was a small, careful letter that apologized for nothing and admitted nothing and arrived, I think, because something in her needed to reach out without being willing to go any further than that. I read it once. I did not reply right away. I have been thinking about what a reply would actually mean and whether it would be for her or for me. I am not done thinking about it. Andrew texted me in November. 2 lines. He said he had left the firm. He said he was not sure what came next. He said, and this was the part I read 4 times, "I think you were right, and I did not know how to hear it at the time. I have not written back yet. I am waiting until I know what to say, which is new for me. I used to say things before I knew what I meant by them. Now I am more careful. My name is Emma Whitmore. I was the anomaly in my family, the liability, the one who built small, strange birds out of Dollarama clay and had them thrown away without comment. I build much larger things now, things that are made from grief and stubbornness, and a very long time alone in a room with my hands in the earth. Things that are, according to the people I trust most, honest. And I am learning, slowly, that honesty is not a quality that needs to justify itself to anyone. The morning light comes in through the north skylights at 6:30 and lands on the work table in a long, warm stripe, and I get up and I go there and I work. And outside the window, the hills are turning, whatever color they turn this particular morning, and the lake is still and enormous at the bottom of the valley. And none of it is mine exactly. I am only borrowing it, but for now, it is where I am, and where I am is exactly where I chose to be. What would you choose if you stopped choosing what other people needed you to choose? Tell me in the comments. I would genuinely like to know.